So here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. So this is how Form 4868 looks like. So we're speaking here about an application for automatic extension of time to file your tax return, right? So basically the IRS grants you 6 more months. So instead of April 15th, you are going all the way to October 15th when filing your taxes. So basically part one, you have the what the IRS calls identification. So you got to put your first name, last name, and part two, you have to put part one, still on part one, you have to put your address. So we're speaking about your street address, your city and zip, and your state. And part two, you have to put your social security number. And if this is actually related, if this is a joint return, you have to put your spouse's your spouse's social as well. And so that's part one. Part one, pretty straightforward. Part two, you got to put the individual income tax, because the IRS just wants to make sure before they grant you the extension that you are basically sort of accurate, or let's say current, with your tax obligations. So basically here you put on line 4 the estimates of total tax liability for this year, and how much you have made in terms of payments. So we're speaking about a delta. So there's a delta here in terms of balance due. On line 6, you put that. So line 6, balance due. In our case here, in our hypothetical case, we have a $2,000 delta in our disfavor. Really, this is what we owe the IRS, and amount that you are paying with by requesting this extension, you're paying 1,000. So at least you got to pay something, okay? And so if line 8 or 9 apply to you, then you really check those boxes. And so in terms of filing the paper form, you have to see here that the IRS has a series of addresses that you have to file the form to, depending on the state you're living in. So you can see this on the screen right now. And I also wanted to show you the fact that when we talk about the application for automatic extension of time to file U.S. individual income tax return, it's really important to understand that you always have to pay your taxes when asking for an extension, right? If the IRS is telling you, hey, listen, you can actually file by October 15, it doesn't mean you have to pay by October 15. It means that you are able to put your paperwork together before October 15. But if you owe, you have to pay before. Otherwise, you're exposing yourself to interest and penalties. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Let me talk to you about the approach you need to really follow here when we talk about Form 4868. It's important to understand that when we talk about this form, let's first define what it is. And it is a form that allows the individuals to request an extension to file their federal income tax return. So any individual who needs more time to file their income tax return can use Form 4868, including those who are self-employed, those who owe taxes, and those who are not able to actually file their taxes by the original due date. And so Form 4868, for all intents and purposes, serves the following goals: to request an additional 6 months, 4 months for taxpayers who are out of the country to file the following tax forms: 1040, 1040 SR, 1040 NR, 1040 PR, and 1040 SS. To also extend the time to file the gift and generation skip and transfer tax return, so Form 709 for the 2020-2023 calendar year income tax return. However, it does not extend, as I said before, the time to pay any gift and the GST tax due, and the taxpayers should use a Form 8892 to make the payment. And failure to pay the amount due by the regular due date for Form 709 or other forms for that matter will result in interest charges, and potential penalties. If the donor passed away during this year, taxpayers should refer to the instructions for Form 709 and 80. So when should you file this form, really? So basically, as I said before, the thing is that if you are requesting an automatic extension, if you want to have it automatically, you can actually, I'll speak about that later on, but you can actually file it through software, through your H&R Block, Task Layer, efile.com, Jackson Hewitt, whatever. You can use tax software to file that form You can do it automatically, or you can use a regular form. But for all intents and purposes, the due date is April 15th for most taxpayers. And if the due date falls on a weekend or a holiday, the due date is typically extended to the next business day. If you cannot file your tax return by the original due date, you can request an extension by filing Form 48 CCS. So this gives you more time. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about Form 4868. Let's dig a little deeper here in terms of the steps you need to really follow if you have to pay attention. So what I want to do is that when we talk about Form 4868, we have a relatively simple form here, okay? You got to provide your personal information, including your name, address, and social security number. As I showed you before, you want to estimate your total tax liability for the year. You want to enter any payments you have already made towards your tax liability. You want to calculate your balance due, if any. You want to determine the amount you want to pay with your extension request, and sign and date the form. Please sign and date the form. If you don't sign, the IRS will not process your automatic, your extension request. So we have part one. So part one of Form 4868 requires you to provide your identification details. So your name, first name, last name, your social for both you and your spouse, if applicable. Part two, this is the individual income tax. What I want to say here is that please do round off dollars to whole dollars on this form, and you want to enter your estimated total tax liability that you will report on your 2023 return on line 4. And if you expect this amount to be zero, you want to enter zero, and you want to enter the estimated total payments you will report on this form. Report that on line 5. One thing I want to say here is that it's really important to understand that you want to be as transparent as possible, and it's one of those things where you have to prepare a little bit in advance, because even though this Form 4868 gives you an automatic extension, in other words, the IRS grants it automatically, you must, if you will, you must pay your taxes. So the time to actually pay your taxes is not granted automatically. No, it doesn't happen that way. If you want to have an extension of time to pay, then you have to negotiate another process. But this is totally different, because taxes and interest and penalties will still be there anyway. Okay, what I'm trying to say is, even if the IRS agrees to your extension to pay, they will still be charging you the interest and also also other penalties depending upon the situation that you have. Okay, so it's totally possible. Now let's talk about how to make a payment, because the thing is that if you owe taxes, chances are you might have to pay. Otherwise, again, as I said before, you are exposing yourself to interest and penalties and so on and so forth. And so you have failure to file, you have failure to pay. So if you owe taxes, you should pay as much as you can with your extension request to minimize interest and penalties. This is really this is a smart move. And you can make a payment by mailing a check or a money order with your Form 4868. But you can use the IRS's electronic federal tax payment system, the EFTPS, and you can also make a payment by credit or debit card. But keep in mind that there may be a processing fee depending upon the card that you're using. So how do you actually pay by check or money order for Form 4868? Well, use the appropriate address in the middle column under where to file a paper form. I think I showed you this before, and so you have to see, and the address depends on the state you actually are applying from. Make sure your check or money order, you have to make that check or money order payable to the United States Treasury, and write your social security number, date, time, phone number, and 2023 Form 4863 on your check or money transfer. 2023 or 2024, depending on the year that you want the extension to be to be happening. Do not staple or attach your payments to Form 4868. And if you actually happen to e-file Form 4868 and mail a check or money order to the IRS, you want to use a completed paper Form 4868 as a voucher and indicate that your extension request was filed electronically. You got to specify that, otherwise you'll be totally the IRS might be a little confused. Note that when you provide a check as a payment, you authorize the IRS to use information from your check to make a one-time electronic fund transfer or process the payment as a check transaction. Okay, and so the IRS cannot accept a single check, including a cashier's check, for amounts of 100 million or more. So if you are sending $100 million or more by check, you need to spread the payment over 2 or more checks, with each check made out for an amount less than 100 million. This is just the law. The 100 million or more limit does not apply to electronic payments, so consider another method of payment if your payment is the $100 million or more. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about Form 4868. I want to quickly talk to you about the deadline to file Form 4868 and request for an extension. Now, the thing here is that Form 4868, as I've said before, actually, you got to file this form by the original due date of your tax return, which is typically April 15th for most taxpayers. Now, if the 15th falls on a weekend, it's actually the next working day. If you cannot file your tax return by the original due date, you can really request an extension, not a problem. Now, there are many benefits. I mean, when we talk about actually requesting an extension to actually file your tax return, you have many benefits. You know, filing Form 4868 and requesting an extension has advantages such as you have more time to prepare and file your tax return. Think about it. Less stress. That's just wonderful. You have reduced risk of errors and mistakes due to rushing. You have avoidance of the failure to file penalty, which can be really, really huge. You have the avoidance of the failure to pay penalty if you owe taxes. This is kind of important also. You have the opportunity to review tax saving strategies and ensure accuracy in your tax return. So bottom line here is if you need more time to think before you actually file your tax return, you have a clear idea of what you're filing and what kind of tax compliance strategies you need to implement. Now, there are some common mistakes to avoid when filing Form 4868. And so failing to sign and date the form, you have to make sure that you actually sign and date the form. And in some cases, some taxpayers actually are not estimating properly their tax liability. So again, it's one of those things where you can use an app to file your taxes. You can use software to file your taxes, and also file this Form 4868. Or you can actually just outsource everything to a third party. It can be a CPA, it could be an EA, it can be an enrolled agent. It can be anybody who has expertise when it comes to 1040 and Form 4868. And so another mistake that you want to avoid when filing Form 4868 is not making a payment or underestimating the payment amount, and also not submitting the form by the due date. So remember, we're speaking here about April 15th. So you want to make sure that the form goes to the IRS way before that, or at least by that date. But the thing is, so after you file Form 4868, a lot of things happen. So you have extension granted. So if your Form 4868 is accepted by the IRS, you'll be granted an automatic extension of time to file your tax return. And this gives you an additional 6 months to complete and file your tax return. And you can have that. You can have no response. So if you don't hear back from the IRS after filing Form 4868, it's likely that your extension has been approved. However, it's always a great idea to double check with the IRS or let's say your tax professional to confirm. And you may need to pay estimated taxes. So filing Form 4868 does not grant you an extension of time to pay any taxes owed. If you owe taxes, you will need to estimate your tax liability and make a payment by the original tax deadline to avoid interest and penalties. And you may have late payment penalties. So if you owe taxes and do not make a payment by the original tax deadline, you actually may be subject to a failure to pay penalty, which can be as high as 0.5% per month of the unpaid tax amount. And you can have an amended return. So if let's say you discover errors or omissions on your tax return after filing Form 4868, you can still file an amended return before the extended deadline. So how do you file your return after requesting an extension? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, once you have filed Form 4868 and received an extension, you have until October 15th to file your federal income tax return. So that's 6 months from the April 15th original deadline, right? So to file your tax return, you will need to gather all the necessary documents including W-2s, 1099s, and other income and deduction information. So everything depends upon your situation, and don't forget that you may have to have additional information depending on what you're claiming on your taxes, okay? And so you can file your tax return online using tax preparation software or by mailing a paper return to the IRS. So everything is totally possible. And so basically, if you want to claim credit for payment made with this form, let's say if you made a payment with your Form 4868 extension request, you can claim a credit for that payment on your tax return. To claim the credit, you will need to include the payment amount on your tax return and complete the appropriate section of the form. So that this is your Form 1040. Let me talk to you about other tax extension options for individuals. So basically, if you are an individual taxpayer, you have other avenues for let's say for relief, if you will. So in addition to Form 4868, there are more tax extension options for individuals. For example, taxpayers living abroad may be eligible for an automatic 2-month extension without filing a form. Military personnel serving in a combat zone may also be eligible for an extension. Now, there are some penalties and interest for late tax filing. So if you do not file your tax return by the extended due date, you may be subject to penalties and interest. The failure to file penalty is usually 5% of the unpaid taxes for each month or part of a month that a return is late, up to a maximum of 25%. And the failure to pay penalty is usually 0.5% of the unpaid taxes for each month or part of a month that the taxes are not paid, up to a maximum of a 25%. And so it's one of those things where, in terms of knowing where to file a paper form, it really depends on the address. So where you are located at, the state and city where you are located at, will determine basically the address that the form should go to. And so the IRS provides a list of private delivery services on their website in case you want to maybe overnight the form to them. And so it's one of those things where you have to see what really applies to you, okay? And you can still e-file your tax return after requesting an extension. However, you must file your tax return by the extended due date, okay? October 15th. And so what happens if you don't file your tax return by the extended due date? You are subject to penalties and interest that I just listed to you a little earlier. It's one of those things where you do not want to be in that situation. And so basically, in terms of, so once you file your extension request, if this request was approved, you will receive a confirmation notice from the IRS acknowledging that they have received your extension request, okay? So directly here, or indirectly for that matter, you know that you have 6 months. So if they say, listen, we have received it and we actually are okay with it, then you know it is approved. In some cases, they might not say that they are okay with it, but if they don't say they deny it, then you know it is approved anyway. So by default, that notice is usually approved, giving all taxpayers the ability to file their taxes 6 months from the original due date. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Let me quickly recap to this conversation here. So we were speaking about Form 4868. So I gave you the overview, the approach, and now I'm doing the recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll speak to you another time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.